Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is, well, it's pretty heavy, but absolutely fascinating from a psychological standpoint. We're going to examine how the children of top Nazi officials processed their inherited legacy after the Third Reich fell. We'll be taking an objective look at the incredibly varied paths they went down. I mean, we're talking everything from fierce, unwavering denial to just profound, crushing shame. It's a really revealing look into inherited trauma, cognitive dissonance, and identity.
Just think about this for a second. How do you live with a name that is literally synonymous with history's greatest evils? Imagine growing up only to find out that the dad who bounced you on his knee, who wrote you sweet letters or bought you presents, was actually a central architect of the Holocaust or a convicted war criminal. How on earth does a human mind reconcile that? Today, we are exploring the immense mental toll of that dark inheritance.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a fall from privilege, look at the path of loyalty, explore the burden of shame, discuss conflict and avoidance, and finally, wrap things up with the shadow of history.
Starting with Section 1, the fall from privilege, or as we're calling it, from little princesses to prisoners. So, to really grasp the coping mechanisms of these descendants, we first have to understand the absolute, world-shattering shock they went through when the war ended. Take Etta Goering, for example, the daughter of Hermann Goering. Back in 1938, her birth was literally a national celebration. I mean, Hitler was her godfather. By 1940, she's treated like a little princess. She's gifted a miniature 50-meter palace at the family estate, complete with its own theater, surrounded by servants and priceless art by Lucas Cranach the Elder. But then, fast forward to April and May of 1945. Her luxurious estate is blown to rubble on her own father's orders. She's shuffled off to Alpine retreats, and within weeks, she and her mom are captured by U.S. troops and thrown into internment. Her entire reality just collapsed overnight.
Picture this. At just 7 years old, Etta's world of limitless power and luxury completely evaporated. Allied personnel actually noted she was quiet and polite, just tightly gripping a small suitcase with the very few belongings she was allowed to keep. That tiny, intimate human detail really grounds this massive historical narrative for us. The trauma of this sudden dislocation, compounded by losing her father to suicide in a Nuremberg cell just hours before his scheduled execution, it deeply shaped the emotional armor these kids would wear for the rest of their lives.
Moving into Section 2, the path of loyalty, looking at the stubborn defenses of fathers. Faced with the horrific truth about their fathers, one major psychological response was just absolute total denial. A fierce loyalty that lasted their entire lives. Take Gudrun Himmler, daughter of Heinrich Himmler, who was a primary architect of the Holocaust. Heinrich absolutely doted on her. He'd fly her to his Berlin offices and call her by her sweet childhood nickname, Puppy. For Gudrun, the cognitive dissonance was so intense that protecting her dad's image became her life's mission. She flat out refused to believe he committed suicide, insisting he was assassinated. She even became an integral part of this group called Stille Hilfe, or Silent Aid. It was a secretive network dedicated to helping fugitive and condemned former SS members. Her loyalty was completely unshakable.
We actually see a really similar coping mechanism with Wolf Hess, the son of Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess. Rather than distancing himself, Wolf practically dedicated his whole existence to rewriting history. He constantly visited his dad in prison, set up a defense committee in the 50s that somehow gathered hundreds of thousands of supporters, and actually wrote books trying to rebrand his father as a German hero rather than a war criminal. And, much like Gudrun Himmler, when his father committed suicide in 1987 at the age of 93, Wolf's denial kicked right back in. He claimed it was British foul play. He literally spent his whole life trying to absolve his father of guilt.
All right, on to Section 3, the burden of shame, the radical rejection of the bloodline.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the total flip side of what we just talked about. This path features descendants who aggressively confronted, internalized, and just radically denounced their dark heritage. We can actually see this huge juxtaposition right within a single bloodline. On one hand, you have Etta Goering steadfastly defending her father Hermann as a kind, loving man living quietly with that infamous label in Europe. But then, look at Bettina Goering, Hermann's grandniece. Even though she was born after the war, she felt the immense emotional weight of that name. She completely rejected the family narrative, openly talked about the shame, and moved as far away as possible, eventually settling in New Mexico and the U.S.
And you really have to understand just how far Bettina was willing to go to break this chain. She stated her goal was, quote, to end the line and the shadow of Goering. Bettina and her brother made the incredibly profound and honestly chilling decision to voluntarily undergo sterilization. Think about that. They biologically ensured that the generational transmission of their family's dark legacy would stop with them. It doesn't get more radical than that when it comes to rejecting a bloodline. Then you have guys like Nicholas Frank, representing another facet of this rejection. His dad, Hans Frank, was brutally known as the Butcher of Poland. Instead of hiding from it, Nicholas confronted this history head-on. He dedicated his adult life to researching and educating everyone else about his father's monstrous crimes. He wrote books like In the Shadow of the Reich to publicly and vehemently denounce his own father. His coping mechanism was just complete, transparent condemnation.
And then there's Martin Bormann Jr., the son of Hitler's powerful inner circle official. The horrific truth of his father's actions led him on a quest for extreme spiritual redemption. He actively distanced himself from the ideology, converted to Catholicism, and worked as a missionary in the Congo and Cameroon, really striving to make amends for his father's misdeeds. Though I should definitely note, his later life was heavily complicated by severe abuse allegations against him during his time in the church, so his own personal legacy became deeply troubled as well.
Next up is Section 4, Conflict and Avoidance, basically being trapped in the middle.
So what happens when you're wrestling with complete disgust, but you're just unable to fully sever those deep, biological, emotional bonds? Let's walk through the agonizing journey of Rolf Mengele, the son of the notorious Nazi doctor Josef Mengele. Rolf was raised far away from the camps, actually believing his absent father was a war hero, until he faced the absolute shock of learning the truth as a teenager. Driven by this really complex curiosity, he secretly traveled to South America in 1977 to meet his father. Afterwards, he altered his identity to sever ties and try to live a normal, quiet life as an attorney in Germany.
But the psychological conflict here is just paralyzing. During that 1977 meeting, Rolf realized his father showed absolutely zero guilt for the horrific experiments at Auschwitz. He even tried to rationalize them. Rolf despised everything his father represented. Yet, he couldn't muster the emotional strength to betray his own flesh and blood to the Nazi hunters who were looking for him. He kept the South American hideout a secret, which allowed the Angel of Death to escape justice. It's just a profound, real-world illustration of being emotionally trapped. Another really striking example is Albert Speer Jr. His father was Hitler's primary architect and armaments minister. Following the war, when his family took refuge in Heidelberg, the trauma actually manifested physically in young Albert. He developed a severe stutter that he had to fight to overcome. Fascinatingly, he also became an architect, but he spent his entire life fiercely guarding his independence. He once stated, "I have tried my whole life to separate myself from my father." He carried that massive shadow but desperately tried to outrun it through his own merit.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the shadow of history, focusing on generational trauma and justice.
When we look at these wildly polarized paths, we really see the immense, almost incomprehensible burden of inherited guilt. And get this, it wasn't until the year 2018 that both Etta Goering and Gudrun Himmler passed away. Right up until the modern era, they took their unwavering, protective loyalty to their fathers straight to the grave. It just proves that for some, the defense mechanisms constructed in childhood simply never break down.
Which leaves us with this final, really powerful question to reflect on. What is the true psychological cost of inherited history? And can a family line ever truly be severed from its past? Whether it's through fierce denial like Wolf Hess, radical sterilization like Bettina Goering, or the paralyzing conflict of Rolf Mengele, the children of the Nazi elite prove that the sins of the father cast a long, incredibly complex shadow. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this deep dive into historical memory and internalized guilt has left you with a lot to think about. See you next time.